That would have destroyed more than one life.
There's something unsettling about any unsolved case. The idea that someone can vanish, or that a crime can happen without a clear answer. But what's even more disturbing are the cases where we do have a clue. I'm talking about the ones that were caught on camera, situations where there's actual footage, video, audio, a recording, something you can see and hear with your own eyes, and yet it still doesn't make sense. Some show the final moments before a person disappears. Others capture things so strange, so sudden, or so violent, they feel impossible to explain. In this video, we're going to look at some of the most chilling, bizarre, and truly sinister cases ever caught on camera, and that, to this day, remain unsolved. Let's begin. On October 8th, 2009, a family of 3 set out to look for a piece of land in the rugged wilderness of the Sans Bois Mountains in Oklahoma. Bobby Jamison, his wife Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison were hoping to purchase 40 acres of remote property near the town of Red Oak, a place where they could start a new, quieter life, far away from the troubles that seemed to be following them. They drove into the mountains in their white pickup truck, but they would never drive out. They simply vanished, leaving behind a series of baffling clues that have fueled a dark and complex mystery for over a decade. For days, no one knew anything was wrong. But then, on October 17th, a group of hunters exploring a remote part of Latimer County stumbled upon the family's abandoned truck. It was locked and sitting on the side of a dirt road, seemingly untouched. When police arrived, the scene they found inside didn't look like a typical crime, but it made no sense. On the front seat were the parents' wallets, identification, and cell phones. Their coats were still in the truck, a strange thing to leave behind in the cold October air. On the floor, investigators found a bank bag. Inside was $32,000 in cash. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was the family's dog, Maisie, found inside the cab, severely malnourished but still alive after more than a week of being trapped alone. It was clear the family had not planned to be gone for long. The one clue that offered a final glimpse of the family was a single photograph of Madison, taken with Sherilyn's phone. It shows the little girl on a nearby hilltop, and for years people have debated her expression. To some, she looks happy, perhaps on the verge of a laugh. To others, her face is tense, her mouth open as if she is about to cry out. The scene suggested the family had left their truck in a hurry or had been forced out. But if it was a robbery, the money would have been taken. If they had simply gone for a walk, why would they leave their coats, their phones, their dog, and every dollar they had? A massive search began the next day. A team of over 300 people, using ATVs, horses, and drones, scoured the wilderness. The terrain was treacherous, with rocky ridges and thick forest that made the search incredibly difficult. For days they looked, but found nothing. With no leads in the wilderness, investigators turned their attention back to the family's home in Eufaula, Oklahoma. There they found something that only deepened the mystery: footage from the family's own home security camera. The video shows Bobby and Sherilyn on the day they left, packing their truck. But their behavior is strange. They move back and forth between the house and the truck over 20 times, carrying boxes and bags. They don't speak, they don't gesture to each other. Their faces are blank, almost emotionless, and their movements are stiff and methodical. Some have described them as being in a trance-like state, moving like robots performing a programmed task. The grainy, silent footage is deeply unsettling. The security footage also revealed 2 crucial items that were not found in the abandoned truck. The family was seen packing a brown briefcase, and friends confirmed they always kept a .22 caliber pistol under the driver's seat. Neither the briefcase nor the gun were anywhere to be found. With the search in the woods yielding nothing, and the footage from their home only creating more questions, the case went cold. Hunting season began, making it too dangerous for search parties to continue, and a quiet fell over the mountains. For 4 years, there was nothing. The family's fate was a complete unknown. Then, in November of 2013, another group of hunters were walking through the same area, about 3 miles from where the truck had been found. There, lying partially buried under fallen leaves, they discovered skeletal remains. After 8 months of forensic testing, dental records confirmed the unthinkable. It was Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison. They had been found, but the mystery was far from over. Because of the advanced state of decomposition, an official cause of death was impossible to determine. Investigators did find a small, suspicious hole in the back of Bobby's skull, which at first they believed could have been from a bullet, possibly from the family's own missing pistol. But for reasons they never fully explained, They later walked back that theory. When asked how a massive search effort could have missed the bodies for 4 years, the sheriff's office stated that fallen leaves had likely hidden them from view. With no official cause of death, theories began to circulate. The first focused on Sherilyn. She suffered from severe depression and bipolar disorder. Just before the trip, she had written a hateful 11-page letter to Bobby, which was found in the truck. This led some to believe she may have been responsible in a murder-suicide, possibly shooting her husband and daughter before taking her own life. But this theory has problems. No gun was ever found near the remains, and it doesn't explain why the family would have walked 3 miles into the woods without coats or supplies. Another theory points to foul play. Bobby's father had a difficult relationship with the family, and Bobby had even accused him of being involved with drugs and the Mexican cartel. But Bobby's father was elderly and in poor health at the time, living in a care home, making him an unlikely suspect. The large amount of cash in the truck led others to speculate that the family was involved in a methamphetamine deal that went horribly wrong. This could explain the missing gun and briefcase, but again it raises difficult questions. Why would they bring their 6-year-old daughter to a drug deal? And if the deal went bad, why was the $32,000 in cash left behind? Perhaps the strangest theory comes from the family's own words in the weeks before they disappeared. They had become convinced their house was haunted. Bobby told his pastor that spirits were living with them, one of which had wings and would speak to his daughter Madison. He even asked the pastor about acquiring special bullets that could be used to kill spirits. The family had purchased a satanic Bible to try and perform some kind of exorcism. This has led many to wonder if their odd trance-like behavior in the security footage was the result of a shared delusion or psychosis, a deep paranoia that drove them to flee into the woods, where they ultimately succumbed to the elements. In the end, we are left with only silent images and unanswered questions. A grainy video of a family moving in a strange, silent rhythm, a single debated photograph of a little girl, and 3 skeletons lying face down on a lonely mountainside. The Jamison family went looking for a place to escape their demons, but what they found in the Oklahoma woods remains a secret that the mountains have yet to tell. But as chilling as it is to find a mystery buried under leaves and time, our next case offers something even worse. A disappearance with no body, no crime scene, and a final message that reads, "You'll never find him." To understand what happened to Timothy Pitson, you have to start with his mother, Amy. By all accounts, she adored her son. She was the one who added the extra M to his name, just to make it unique, to make him more special. Friends and family describe a powerful, unbreakable bond between them. Timothy was the bright center of a world that, for Amy, was often dark. She had a long and difficult history with severe depression, an illness that had shadowed her through 3 divorces and at least 1 attempt to take her own life. Her 4th marriage, to a man named Jim Pitson, had brought her a new sense of hope, and together they had Timothy. He was, in every sense, her reason for living. But by 2011, her marriage to Jim was beginning to crumble. They fought constantly, and Amy became convinced that another divorce was inevitable. Given her history of mental illness and instability, she likely believed that in any custody battle, she would lose. The thought of losing the one person who brought her happiness, the child she loved so dearly, must have been unbearable. On the morning of May 11th, 2011, Jim Pitson dropped his 6-year-old son off at Greenman Elementary School in Aurora, Illinois. He watched Timothy, his little Spider-Man backpack bouncing on his shoulders, run towards his kindergarten teacher. It was a perfectly ordinary moment, the kind a parent sees every day and thinks nothing of. Jim drove away, completely unaware that it was the last time he would ever see his son. When he returned that afternoon to pick Timothy up, the school told him he was already gone. Records showed that just 30 minutes after Jim had left that morning, Amy had arrived. She told the school there was a family emergency and signed him out. There was no emergency. Amy had lied. Jim's calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. She and Timothy had simply vanished. While Jim and the rest of the family went into a panic, security cameras began to document a strange and ultimately tragic road trip. Amy and Timothy had driven off on what, to the 6-year-old boy, must have felt like a grand adventure. The pieces of footage shows them at the Key Lime Cove, a large indoor water park in Gurnee, Illinois. Later, cameras capture them at the Brookfield Zoo. In these silent, grainy images, they look like any other family on a fun day out. There is no hint of the darkness that surrounds them. Amy bought Timothy toys and candy. From his perspective, he was having the time of his life, skipping school to go on an amazing trip with his mom. He was a child placing his complete and total trust in the person he loved most. Oblivious to the fact that he was, in reality, a missing person at the center of a frantic search, the trip continued into Wisconsin. From a hotel, Amy made a series of phone calls that only deepened the mystery. She called Jim's brother and told him that Timothy was safe and that the two of them were fine. But then she added that Timothy was hers and would always be hers. She also called her own mother, again insisting that Timothy was safe. During that call, Timothy could be heard in the background, talking and playing, at one point complaining that he was hungry. His voice, captured on that call, proved he was still alive and well, but it did little to ease the family's fears. The most telling detail is who she didn't call, her husband, Jim. She made no attempt to contact him, to explain what she was doing or why. At approximately 10 a.m. on May 13th, 2 days after they disappeared, security cameras at the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells captured the final heartbreaking image of Timothy Pitson. The footage shows Amy and her son standing together at the checkout counter. Timothy looks around the lobby with the simple curiosity of a child. He looks up at his mother, who appears calm, almost serene, as she settles the bill. There is nothing in their body language to suggest that anything is wrong. You watch this footage, knowing what comes next, and it's deeply frustrating. You see a little boy, entirely at the mercy of his mother's unknowable plan, standing innocently beside her in the final moments before he vanishes from the world forever. This grainy hotel video is the last time anyone, other than his mother, has ever seen Timothy. Later that night, the security camera trail picks up again, but with a crucial difference. Amy is seen walking into a Family Dollar store in Winnebago, Illinois. She moves through the aisles, picking up pens, paper, and envelopes. But something is missing from the scene. For the first time on their trip, Timothy is not with her. She is completely alone. A short time later, another camera captures her at a different store, buying milk and crackers. Again, she is alone. After making her purchases, she drove to Rockford, Illinois, and checked into the Rockford Inn. She booked a room for one. It was in that quiet, anonymous motel room that Amy Pitson's story came to its tragic end. The next morning, on May 14th, a motel maid found her body. She had taken her own life, leaving behind the letters she had just purchased supplies for. In one note, she apologized for the mess she had created. She also wrote that Timothy was safe with people who would love and care for him. Then, she added the 5 words that would define the entire mystery: "You will never find him." The case became a national obsession. For a time, it seemed like the whole world was looking for the little boy with the Spider-Man backpack. Police examined Amy's vehicle and found a significant amount of blood on the back seat. This led to the most straightforward and most terrible theory, that Amy had murdered her son before taking her own life. In this scenario, her note saying he was safe and would never be found was a dark euphemism for him being in heaven. Investigators also found dirt and weeds on the car's undercarriage, suggesting she had pulled off onto a rural, unpaved area, perhaps to bury his body somewhere between Wisconsin and Rockford. This would explain why Timothy was suddenly absent from the security footage on her final day. But as investigators dug deeper, this theory began to show cracks. The blood in the car was later determined to have most likely come from a nosebleed Timothy suffered weeks before his disappearance. And despite extensive forensic searches of the hotels where they stayed and the motel room where Amy died, police found absolutely no evidence of foul play, no signs of a struggle, and no trace of a crime scene. This forces us to consider a second, more complex possibility. In her note, Amy wrote that she didn't want Timothy to be hurt by Jim because of her choices. This line is strange. Why would she assume Jim would hurt his own son? Some have speculated that her choices alluded to something much deeper than just the trip. When Amy and Jim first met, Jim was a cancer survivor. He had undergone chemotherapy, a treatment which often results in infertility. His ability to have a child with Amy was seen by both of them as a miracle. But what if it wasn't? This theory suggests that Timothy was not Jim's biological son. Perhaps Amy, fearing that the truth would come out in a messy divorce, and that a betrayed Jim might lash out, decided to give Timothy to his biological father, who is now raising him in secret. This would explain the secrecy, the trip, and why she believed he was with someone who would love and care for him. This leads to the third theory, the one his family desperately clings to. They believe Amy's note was literal. They believe she used the 2-day trip to arrange a handover, giving her son to another family or a group through some kind of illegal underground adoption network. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that Amy's personal cell phone and Timothy's Spider-Man backpack were never recovered. Perhaps she left them with him, a final link to his past. This theory means Timothy could still be alive, being raised off the grid, homeschooled and unaware of the search for him. For 8 long years, this hope was all his father, Jim, had. Then, in April of 2019, the miracle everyone was waiting for seemed to happen. A teenager was found wandering the streets of Newport, Kentucky, telling police his name was Timothy Pitson. He claimed he had just escaped from 2 men who had held him captive for 7 years. The news exploded. For a brief, blissful 24 hours, the world believed the mystery was solved. But a DNA test brought a crushing end to the celebration. The boy was not Timothy. He was a 23-year-old man named Brian Reaney, a serial impersonator who had concocted a cruel and devastating hoax. The pain this must have inflicted on Jim Pitson is unimaginable. Today, Timothy Pitson remains a missing person. All 3 theories remain just that, theories. We are left with unanswered questions and the silent, haunting footage. In every frame, he is a trusting child, following his mother into an unknown future. The footage is a permanent record of a little boy who walked out of a hotel lobby and vanished from the face of the earth. But in the next case, we move from a missing child to a man who may have been running from something or someone. And this time, the camera caught every step. The case of Steven Coucher begins and ends with a few seconds of silent, grainy surveillance footage. It shows a man parking his car on a quiet residential street, getting out, and simply walking away forever. This is the last time anyone has ever seen Steven Coucher, a man who vanished without a trace in the sunny suburbs of Henderson, Nevada, on December 13, 2009. To understand how a person can just walk out of frame and into oblivion, you first have to understand who he was. Steven was 30 years old when he disappeared. Born into a devout Latter-day Saint family in 1979, his faith was a vital part of his life. He was described by everyone who knew him as a good person, someone who didn't drink or use drugs, but who was also full of life and a love for spontaneous adventure. He was a college graduate with a degree in communications and had worked for a time at the Salt Lake Tribune newspaper. But the economic recession of the late 2000s hit hard, and Steven was laid off. He moved 300 miles south to St. George, Utah, a city where he had no family and few friends, hoping to find a fresh start. But the fresh start never came. In St. George, Steven struggled to find stable employment. He took on odd jobs to make ends meet, including one that involved handing out flyers for a local company. The financial pressure began to mount. He fell behind on his rent, and by early December of 2009, he was 3 months overdue. His landlord, unable to get a hold of him, eventually called Steven's parents to let them know about the situation. This series of events seems to be the catalyst for the strange and inexplicable behavior that would define his final days. On Wednesday, December 9th, just 4 days before he vanished, Steven spoke with his sister on the phone. By all accounts, it was a normal conversation. He didn't mention any travel plans or any significant problems. But later that same day, his father called him to talk about the overdue rent. According to his family, Steven seemed to downplay the severity of the issue and was audibly frustrated that his landlord had involved his parents. It was after this phone call that something changed. That night, or perhaps in the very early hours of the next morning, Steven Coucher got into his car and started driving. He didn't tell anyone where he was going or why. By 6:45 a.m. on Thursday morning, he had driven over 300 miles north to Salt Lake City. From there, he kept going, driving another 200 miles into rural Nevada. Inexplicably, he stopped at the home of an ex-girlfriend's parents in the small community of Ruby Valley. When they asked what he was doing so far from home, he gave a strange and easily disproven excuse. He claimed he was on his way to visit family in Sacramento, California. He had no family in Sacramento. Later that day, he spoke to his sister again on the phone, but never once mentioned where he was, or the fact that he was in the middle of a massive 1,000-mile road trip. A few hours after that, he had a pleasant phone call with his mother. He told her he was looking forward to coming home for Christmas, and she, wanting to help, told him she had just deposited money into his bank account to cover his rent. That money was never touched. By 11 p.m. that night, Steven was finally back home in St. George. In total, he had driven an astonishing 1,091 miles in just over 20 hours, all for a purpose that remains completely unknown. 2 days later, on Saturday, December 12th, his behavior seemed to return to normal. He went out and bought Christmas gifts for his family, fully intending, it seemed, to make the trip home for the holidays. These presents would later be found in his car. The morning of his disappearance, Sunday, December 13th, began with a series of phone calls. An associate from his church in St. George called to ask if he could cover a shift for him. Steven's reply was odd. He told the man he was in Las Vegas. but that he could make the 2-hour drive back if it was really necessary. The man told him not to worry about it. He received 2 more calls from the church, and both times he told them he was in Las Vegas. He wasn't technically in Las Vegas, but he was close, in the neighboring city of Henderson. And it is there, in a quiet, affluent retirement community called Sun City Anthem, that the final concrete record of Stephen Couch's existence was made. At 11:54 a.m., a home security camera captures his tan Chevrolet Cavalier driving down a street and parking near the end of a cul-de-sac. A minute later, the footage shows Stephen getting out of his car. He's wearing a white button-down shirt and slacks, and appears to be holding a folder or a portfolio in his hand. He walks with a sense of purpose, not wandering, but heading somewhere specific. He walks up the sidewalk, glances down at what might be a phone, crosses the street, and walks out of the camera's view. A few moments later, another security camera from a different house picks him up, walking steadily down the sidewalk until he again disappears from the frame. That is the last positive sighting of him. He didn't run. He wasn't chased. He just walked away. The next morning, his voicemail was accessed, but we don't know by whom. It was the last activity on his phone line. 4 days later, after not hearing from him, his family reported him missing. His car was quickly found right where he had left it in the Sun City Anthem neighborhood. Inside were the Christmas presents he had just bought, but the clues only got more confusing. While his car was parked in a safe, upscale community, the last signal from his cell phone pinged a tower miles to the north, in a much rougher, low-income area. Stephen had no known connections to either neighborhood. He was a man from St. George, Utah, who drove to Henderson, Nevada, parked in one neighborhood, and then somehow had his phone signal end in another. The most obvious theory is that he chose to disappear. Perhaps the financial pressures and his inability to find a job led to depression, and he decided to either run away or take his own life. This could explain his secrecy, but it doesn't explain the Christmas gifts. It doesn't explain why he would travel to a random suburb in Henderson, and it certainly doesn't explain who checked his voicemail the next day. This leads to the second, more sinister theory: foul play. The way he walks in the video, with purpose and holding a folder, looks like a man on his way to an appointment or a job interview. It's possible he got involved in something dangerous without realizing it. One of the most compelling versions of this theory suggests that Stephen had taken on some under-the-table work to make money. Given that the 2009 recession was accompanied by a housing market crash, and Las Vegas was one of the hardest-hit cities in the country, one Redditor proposed a chillingly plausible scenario. The theory suggests Stephen was working as an independent contractor serving foreclosure notices. This kind of work would explain everything. It would explain the long, bizarre road trip through rural Nevada, as he may have been delivering notices to remote properties. It would explain his secrecy, as it wasn't a job he would be proud of. It would explain why he parked down the street and walked up to the residence, as that's standard practice to avoid alerting the homeowner. And most tragically, it would provide a clear and violent motive for his disappearance. He may have knocked on the door of a desperate, angry homeowner who had just reached their breaking point. That person could have harmed him, and then disposed of his body and his phone somewhere else, explaining the different locations. We may never know the truth. All that remains is the footage. A few seconds of a man in a white shirt, walking under the Nevada sun, on his way to an unknown appointment with an unknown person, and an unknown fate. The camera recorded his last known steps, but the truth of where they led vanished with him, into the chilling silence of a quiet suburban street. Before we continue, I want to know something from you. If you could reopen one of these cases with $1 million budget and full access to every file, which would it be and why? But what happens when a camera does record the exact moment someone disappears, and the most likely explanation is too horrifying to accept? That's where we go next. Corey McKeague was born in 1993, a young man from Fife, Scotland, with a bright future. He joined the Royal Air Force, becoming a senior aircraftman, serving as a gunner and a medic with No. 2 Squadron. He was based at RAF Honington in Suffolk, England, and by all accounts he was popular, full of life, and loved a good night out with his friends. The night of Friday, the 23rd of September 2016, was supposed to be one of those nights. Corey drove his car into the nearby town of Bury St. Edmunds to meet up with his squadron mates. He planned to leave his car in town overnight and get a lift back to the base, a common practice for him and his friends. That evening, he was in high spirits. He drank, he laughed. He was seen on social media videos singing with musicians in one of the clubs. He was his normal, bubbly self, catching up with people he hadn't seen in a while. It was a perfectly ordinary, happy night out for a 23-year-old serviceman, but it would be his last. As the night wore on, the alcohol took its effect. Around 1:20 in the morning, Corey was separated from his friends after being asked to leave a nightclub called Flex because he was too intoxicated. It was a minor, forgettable event, the kind of thing that happens on nights out all over the world. His friends, assuming he would make his own way home as he often did, didn't worry. After leaving the club, Corey began to walk through the town alone. CCTV cameras picked up his journey. He was seen heading towards his favorite takeaway spot, Pizza Mamma Mia. He seemed to be in a good mood, even playful, interacting with strangers on the street. At the takeaway, he ordered a large meal, 2 burgers, a kebab, and chips. After collecting his food, he walked a short distance and found a doorway to sit in, belonging to an electrical store called Hughes. It's believed he may have even fallen asleep in that doorway for a couple of hours. Then, shortly after 3 in the morning, he got up and started walking again. The last known sighting of Corey McKeague is captured by a single wide-angle CCTV camera overlooking a quiet back street called Brent Govell Street at 3:25 a.m. In the clip, Corey walks casually into the frame from the left. He's wearing light-colored chinos and a pink shirt. He strolls past the camera's view and turns right, walking into a dark, C-shaped loading bay area behind a Greg's Bakery. This area is known locally as the Horseshoe. It's a dead end, a brick and concrete alcove filled with several large industrial-sized commercial waste bins. It's a place you would have no reason to enter unless you were making a delivery or taking out the rubbish. The footage shows no one following him in, and no one leaving. It's as if he stepped into the shadows and simply vanished from the face of the earth. He wasn't reported missing until the following Monday, September 26th, when he failed to show up for duty at his base. That's when the alarm was raised, and a massive search operation involving the police and the RAF's own search teams swung into action. One of the first and most puzzling clues they found came from Corey's mobile phone. Data showed that in the early hours of Saturday morning, shortly after he was last seen, his phone traveled from Bury St. Edmunds to a place called Barton Mills, about 12 miles away. The journey took less than 30 minutes, indicating the phone was inside a vehicle moving at speed. Then, the phone went silent, either switched off, damaged, or its battery finally died. The phone itself has never been found. This piece of data immediately suggested that Corey had left the town in a vehicle. Investigators focused on a bin lorry, a private waste truck that had serviced the bins in the Horseshoe area around 4:20 a.m., roughly an hour after Corey was last seen on camera. Police located the lorry and checked its data. The records showed that the weight of the rubbish it collected from the Horseshoe was a mere 15 kilograms, or about 33 pounds. It was far too light to have contained Corey, who weighed around 200 pounds. Based on this information, the police initially dismissed the bin lorry theory. For months, the investigation looked elsewhere. Did someone give Corey a lift? His mother, Nicola, said her son was friendly and would have likely accepted a ride if offered. Did he arrange to meet someone? Police looked into his use of dating and swinger websites, wondering if he had a pre-arranged rendezvous that went wrong. The family grew frustrated, believing the police weren't pursuing every lead, and even raised money to hire a private investigator. The mystery deepened, and months passed with no answers. Corey was gone, and the only clue was that final, silent piece of footage of him walking into the dark. Then, 5 months into the investigation, there was a breakthrough. The police, reviewing the case, found that the waste management company had made a critical error. The initial weight of 15 kilograms they had provided was wrong. The true weight of the bin's contents collected that morning was over 116 kilograms, or more than 250 pounds. The bin lorry theory, once dismissed, was now the central, most plausible explanation for his disappearance. The police now believed Corey, in his drunken state, had climbed into one of the large industrial bins in the Horseshoe to sleep. An hour later, the bin lorry would have arrived, lifted the bin, and emptied its contents into the compactor, crushing anything inside before driving its load to a landfill site in Milton, Cambridgeshire. What followed was one of the largest and most expensive search operations of its kind. For 20 weeks, a team of specialist officers painstakingly sifted through more than 9,000 tons of compacted rubbish at the landfill. The search cost over £1 million. They found items that were dated to the right time and came from the right place, confirming the lorry's load was there. But after nearly 5 months of searching, they found no trace of Corey McKeague. The search was called off. The police remained convinced he was in the landfill, but accepted that his remains were now irretrievable. His mother, Nicola, struggled to accept the theory. pointing out that her son was fastidious about his appearance and would more likely have slept in his nearby car than in a filthy bin. But his father, Martin McKeague, eventually came to accept what he called the overwhelming evidence. In a heartbreaking statement, he concluded that Corey had indeed climbed into the bin and was now somewhere in the Suffolk waste disposal system. He revealed that his son had a history of sleeping in unusual places, including on top of bins, after nights of drinking. The final piece of evidence came from further analysis of the bin weight data over a period of months. It showed that the lorry's load from that location was almost always under 70 pounds. The only time it was heavy enough to contain a person was on the morning Corey disappeared. In the end, there are no more secrets to uncover. The camera recorded his last conscious act, but the horrifying final moments happened in the crushing darkness, unseen and unheard. But in our next case, the mystery doesn't come from what we didn't see, but from what we did. A phone call, a field, and a voice pleading for help before vanishing forever. On August 9th, 2013, Deputy Neil drove his patrol car down Highway 277. The landscape was flat and dark, miles of brush and fields stretching out into the blackness on either side. He was responding to a simple dispatch call. A truck was parked strangely on the edge of the road, creating a hazard. A few miles south of Bronte, Texas, he saw a white Ford F-150, parked awkwardly over the white line, jutting into the traffic lane. The driver, however, was nowhere in sight. Deputy Neil pulled over to investigate. The truck showed no signs of an accident. There was no damage, no flat tire. The driver's side window was halfway down, but the keys and a phone were missing. The most logical explanation was that the driver had run out of gas and started the long walk to the nearest town. But as the deputy surveyed the scene, another car pulled up on the opposite side of the road. A man and a woman got out, and in the back seat, a young boy was visible. It was 1:15 in the morning. The man had a phone pressed to his ear. He spun around, searching for something only he seemed to know was there. He glanced nervously at the deputy before returning his attention to the field. The woman was texting rapidly on her phone, her gaze flicking back and forth between the screen and the abandoned truck. Deputy Neil approached the couple. He asked them a simple question. "Do you know where the driver is?" The man identified himself as Kyle Lawson. The truck belonged to his 26-year-old brother, Brandon Lawson, a father of 3. He explained that his brother had called him after running out of gas. Brandon had been driving from his home in San Angelo toward Fort Worth, a 3.5-hour trip, following an argument with his longtime girlfriend, Ladessa. According to Kyle, Brandon said he was walking down the highway to find a gas station, but that didn't explain why Kyle was staring so intently into the dark, empty field. If his brother was on the road, why search the brush? It turned out Kyle's story wasn't entirely true. Yes, his brother had run out of gas, but Brandon wasn't walking down the highway. On their last phone call, just moments before the deputy arrived, Brandon had told Kyle, "I can see you. I'm right here." This meant Brandon was hidden somewhere in the darkness, close enough to see his brother and the newly arrived patrol car. Kyle looked around, calling out for his brother, but saw nothing. He watched as Deputy Neil, seemingly unconcerned, got back into his car and drove away. To the deputy, it was just another abandoned vehicle. Kyle, however, believed he knew why his brother was hiding. Brandon had recently discovered there was a felony warrant out for his arrest. He was likely lying low in the brush, waiting for the police to leave. Not wanting to abandon his brother, Kyle and his girlfriend drove a short distance up the road and waited. 30 minutes passed, but Brandon never emerged. Their young son began to cry in the back seat, tired and hungry, so Kyle made the difficult decision to drive home to San Angelo. He expected to hear from Brandon later that night, but he never did. Every call he made went straight to voicemail. The next morning, around 5 a.m., Kyle returned to the spot on Highway 277. Brandon's truck was still there, but his brother was gone. There was no sign of Brandon. No keys, no wallet, nothing. For hours, he drove up and down the highway. If Brandon had wandered too far from the road, he could easily be lost or hurt. 4 days later, on August 13th, the family filed an official missing persons report. At the police station, Kyle confessed that he hadn't told Deputy Neil the whole truth that night. He explained that Brandon wasn't walking down the road. He was hiding nearby, close enough to see everything. He also added another disturbing detail. In one of their phone calls, Brandon had told him he was bleeding and urged him to hurry with the gasoline. The investigating officer was suspicious. His brother was bleeding and hiding from the police, yet Kyle hadn't seemed worried enough to insist on finding him that night. The focus of the investigation quickly shifted. and all eyes turned to Kyle. To clear his name, Kyle offered to take a polygraph test. He passed the first one, but the results of the second were inconclusive. The police noted he was fidgety and coughed frequently, skewing the results. It seemed like nervousness, but they wondered if he was hiding something more. The case remained at a standstill until Ledessa, Brandon's girlfriend, was reviewing his phone records. That night, in the midst of his frantic calls to his brother, Brandon had dialed 911. The recording of that call would become the central piece of evidence in his disappearance. The audio is difficult to understand. The first time you hear it, Brandon's speech is rushed and unclear. The dispatcher struggles to comprehend what he's saying. He begins with, "Yes, I'm in the middle of a field." Then he says, "A staper just pushed some guys over." In that part of Texas, staper is sometimes used as slang for a state trooper. He continues, "We're out here going towards Abilene, on both sides." The next part is even harder to decipher, but it sounds like, "My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. A guy's chasing, unintelligible, into the woods. Please hurry." The dispatcher, confused, asks him to repeat himself. Brandon interrupts, saying words that sound like, "ran into him." The dispatcher seems to interpret this as a car accident, asking, "You ran into them." They then ask if he needs an ambulance. Brandon's response is debated. It sounds like, "No, I need the cops." Some listeners also claim to hear gunshots in the background, but this has never been confirmed. This bizarre call completely changed the investigation. Was Brandon witnessing a crime? Had he seen a state trooper in an altercation with someone? Was he being chased? The call seemed to contradict his actions. He desperately asked for the cops, yet when Deputy Neal arrived just minutes later, he hid from him. The entire night had been strange, starting with the fight at home. Ledessa had initially told police they argued about normal couple things. The truth, which would only come out years later, was much more serious. Brandon had a history of methamphetamine use and had recently relapsed. The fight was about drugs. Brandon had called Kyle earlier that evening asking him to get meth for him. Kyle refused, but Brandon found some elsewhere. This information changed the perception of the 911 call. Was he really witnessing a crime, or was he suffering from meth-induced psychosis? The condition can cause intense paranoia and vivid hallucinations in up to 40% of users. The men chasing him, the staper, the entire terrifying scenario he described to the 911 dispatcher, it might all have been a product of a drug-fueled delusion. Despite the disturbing call, the official investigation quickly grew cold. The Coke County Sheriff's Office searched the area, including with overhead planes. They noted that a severe drought had thinned the vegetation, making it easier to spot something from the air. Yet they found nothing. Just one day after the search began, they concluded that Brandon had intentionally disappeared. They pointed to the fight with Ledessa and his outstanding warrant as motive. They also learned he had cashed out his $401K a week prior, though this was likely because he was about to start a new, better-paying job. By October, the local newspaper, the Observer Enterprise, ran an article with the headline, "Law Enforcement Concludes Man Not in Coke County." The case became even stranger when the sheriff's wife, who also owned the local paper, began posting her own theories on Facebook and online forums. Using her personal and newspaper accounts, she argued that Brandon had run away and shared sensitive case information with strangers online, contradicting herself and causing confusion. For years, the case remained frozen. The family hired a private investigator, but extensive searches turned up nothing. Then, in January of 2022, nearly 9 years after Brandon vanished, a private search party was combing the brush near where the truck had been abandoned. In a field on private property, just a mile from the road, a searcher found an article of clothing that matched what Brandon was last seen wearing. Authorities were called to the scene. They collected the clothing and nearby discovered human remains. The area had been searched by law enforcement from the air years before, but they had missed it. It took almost 2 more years for official confirmation. On Christmas of 2024, DNA analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Brandon Lawson. But the ultimate question remains unanswered. What really happened to Brandon Lawson on that dark Texas highway? We now know where his journey ended, but the story told in that frantic, garbled 911 call, the story of what happened in his final terrifying moments, died with him in that field. But what if there is video of the moment a life is nearly taken? What if it's clear, deliberate, and yet the person responsible simply runs away? On the morning of May 5th, 2017, it was around 7:40 a.m., the peak of the morning rush hour. On Putney Bridge, a historic crossing over the River Thames, thousands of people were making their way to work. But on this particular morning, a single grainy piece of CCTV footage would capture an event so sudden and so senseless that it would leave the city, and soon the world, asking a question that remains unanswered to this day. Who was the Putney Pusher? The footage shows a 33-year-old woman walking northbound across the bridge, keeping to her side of the narrow pedestrian path. The camera's perspective is from a passing bus, looking out onto the pavement. In the distance, a figure comes into view. It's a man, jogging in the opposite direction, heading straight towards her. He is dressed in typical running gear, a light grey t-shirt and dark blue shorts. He appears to be a white male, perhaps in his 30s, with short brown hair and a medium build. He is utterly unremarkable, one of thousands of joggers you might see in London on any given day. As the jogger gets closer, he doesn't change his path. The walkway is narrow, but there is room to pass. The woman seems to adjust her position slightly to make space, but just as their paths are about to cross, the man does something inexplicable. Without breaking his stride, he extends both of his arms forward in a forceful, deliberate motion and shoves the woman with all his weight. There is no hesitation, no stumble, no sign of an accident. It is a clear and direct push. The force of the shove sends the woman tumbling off the pavement directly into the path of an oncoming double-decker bus. Her head and upper body fall into the lane just as the massive vehicle approaches. For a split second, a tragedy seems unavoidable, but the bus driver, Olivier Salry, reacts with incredible speed. He sees the falling shape in his peripheral vision and yanks the steering wheel hard to the right. The bus swerves violently, its tires screeching, missing the woman's head by mere inches. Mr. Salry would later say he was certain he was going to hit her, and that to him, the shove looked completely intentional. The bus comes to a halt, and several passengers, shocked by what they've just witnessed, rush off to help the woman. She is stunned and scraped, but miraculously, has suffered only minor injuries. She gets back to her feet, trying to process the sudden random act of violence, but the jogger doesn't stop. He doesn't look back. He continues his run across the bridge as if nothing at all has happened, disappearing from the camera's view. The story could have ended there, but what happened next makes the case even more disturbing. About 15 minutes later, as the victim was still recovering at the scene, surrounded by concerned bystanders, the same jogger came running back across the bridge, this time heading in the opposite direction. The woman saw him and shouted, trying to get his attention, to demand an explanation. But the man didn't even turn his head. He looked straight ahead, his expression blank and focused, completely ignoring her and the commotion he had caused. He ran past the scene of his crime without a flicker of acknowledgement, and then once again vanished into the London crowd. Then, on August 8, 2017, the Metropolitan Police, having failed to identify the man, released the CCTV footage to the public. The video went viral almost instantly. People were horrified by the cold, casual nature of the assault. The media dubbed the anonymous attacker the Putney Pusher, and a citywide manhunt began. The police were flooded with tips. The footage was analyzed by countless amateur detectives online. Everyone felt they should be able to identify him. After all, the crime was caught on camera, in broad daylight, in one of the most surveilled cities on Earth. The problem was the quality of the footage. While it clearly showed the act, it was just grainy enough that the man's face was not perfectly clear. It was a face that could belong to anyone. Police worked through a list of more than 50 persons of interest. 3 men were arrested in connection with the case, but each arrest led to a dead end. The most publicized arrest was that of a 41-year-old American investment banker named Eric Belquist. He seemed to match the description, but his lawyers quickly provided what they called irrefutable proof that he was not the man. On the day of the attack, he had been in the United States. The police publicly cleared his name, and the search continued. 2 other men, one aged 50 and another 49, were also arrested and questioned, but both were eventually released without any charges. Finally, on June 28, 2018, more than a year after the attack, the police announced they were closing the active investigation. This left everyone with the same baffling question. How could a man commit such a brazen crime and simply get away with it? Over the years, several theories have emerged, trying to make sense of this random act. The most obvious theory is that it was a deliberate, unprovoked assault. The two-handed push, the lack of hesitation, and especially the suspect's cold, emotionless return to the scene all point towards intent. This theory suggests the pusher is simply a violent individual who, on that morning, acted on a dark impulse, perhaps for a thrill, knowing the chances of getting caught in a bustling crowd were slim. Another theory suggests it could have been a case of runner's rage. Perhaps there was a minor, unseen incident that happened moments before the footage begins. Maybe the woman accidentally stepped in his path, or words were exchanged off-camera that provoked an extreme and impulsive reaction. However, there is nothing in the video to support this. The woman appears completely unaware of him until the moment he pushes her. This theory remains pure speculation. The most compelling theory, and the one that might explain his disappearance, is that the jogger was not a local. He could have been a tourist or someone in London for business, staying in a nearby hotel. This would explain why no one in the local community recognized him after the video went viral. He could have been staying at one of the hotels near the bridge, allowing him to quickly retreat to his room after the incident, dispose of his clothes, and perhaps leave the city or even the country within days, long before the police released the footage to the public. He was an anonymous face in a city of millions, and he used that anonymity as a shield. Ultimately, the reason the Putney Pusher was never caught comes down to a few simple, frustrating facts. The jogger's appearance was generic. The city is full of men who fit his description. The CCTV footage, while shocking, was not high resolution enough for a definitive facial identification. And despite London's reputation for being covered in cameras, bridges are notoriously difficult to monitor completely, often having blind spots. He appeared in one moment and was gone in the next. The video is a permanent record of a crime without a motive and without a resolution. Somewhere out there, a man knows what he did on that bridge. He knows he was caught on camera and that an entire city looked for him. And he knows that he got away with it. 6 cases, 6 moments caught on camera, 6 lives altered forever, and yet in every frame, the truth remains just out of sight. If any of these cases are new to you, watch again. But this time, focus only on the footage. You'll see things you missed.